today I finished The Girls of Murder City. Fame, Lust, and the Beautiful Killers Who Inspired Chicago. The musical, or the play, by Douglas Perry. I didn't even really look at the box that much. It's got a picture on the front. Anyway, it is what it says it is. This is nonfiction, and it's about a handful of women tried in Chicago for murder in the early 20s, 1924 specifically. And it's also about some female reporters, mostly Maureen Watkins, who is the woman who wrote Chicago, the play that the musical is an adaptation of. And so she was a reporter for the Tribune for a short time, during which she reported on several murder trials of these beautiful socialite women. And they killed their boyfriends and they got away with it. And so there's some interesting stuff in here about like how easy it was to influence these juries. Like there was this whole thing, almost a joke, but like just this whole thing at the time about how no woman had been like actually convicted of murder in Chicago. And the juries were all men at the time, which I feel is important to point out. Though it's actually like, he actually goes a ways in this book saying that no woman had been convicted of murder at this time in Chicago. But then later is like, actually there had been some, but they were black. And you're like, yikes. So basically, if you were pretty, white, English speaking, and could like, you know, and like you had a certain amount of sophistication, you could get away with murder. But it was only for a short period of time that this was kind of a big deal. Like, the newspapers were obsessed with these women. There were a bunch of them at the jail. And then the Leopold and Loeb case broke, and like, after that, these two women, Belva Gartner and Beulah Annan, both their trials went through and they both got away with murder. And then that was kind of it. It's an okay book. Like, I enjoyed it. I like to read nonfiction about Chicago, but I would say that, like, I didn't like this as much as some of the books I've read about Chicago, just maybe because it's so focused on just a couple specific people. I don't know, I wasn't, and it's not like the musical Chicago has ever been that interesting to me. Like, I've seen the movie, I like it, but, you know, it's not that interesting. But it's not bad. Though I didn't like the guy who reads it does sort of an annoying voice for some of the women. I don't really understand why this was read by a guy, but it doesn't really matter. But like, in my experience of listening to audiobooks, I think it would make more sense if it was read by a woman, but it doesn't matter. That's funny. The writer's work has appeared in the Chicago Tribune, among other papers. But yeah, anyway, so I guess if you want to learn something about Chicago and justice and journalism in 1924, really specifically, or just a bit about the history of the musical Chicago, because the last couple chapters are basically about that, because then, like, the interesting stuff in the city itself is over, and it's like, oh, we're gonna follow Maureen Watkins because she started writing plays. But, I guess I would listen, or I guess I'd read it. Yeah. And, you know, just, it made me feel really bad for the women who actually did get, you know, who like didn't get away with murder, I guess. Like, God, there was this whole bit about this woman, Sibella Nitti, who was an Italian immigrant and she wasn't young and pretty, and she didn't speak any English, and, like, there wasn't even as much evidence to say that she killed her husband, but she got convicted. But then, actually, in the end, that one had a happy ending, because she got a second trial, and then they got pushed back, and then eventually she got out, and got to live the rest of her life. But, I don't know. It was okay. It says this is in the tradition of Karen Abbott's Sin in the Second City, which I've never read, so maybe I should read that. Maybe I would like it more. But yeah, so Jazz Age Chicago. Well, here we are. The fateful day has come. I finished reading Seven Pillars of Wisdom, A Triumph, by T.E. Lawrence. Fuck. Alright, well that took me a long time. However, I would like to say that I am both proud that I finished it, and also very happy that I did read it, and didn't just continue putting it off for the rest of my life. This book is a lot. It is a lot. There are parts of it that are very boring, but most of it is interesting one way or another, and the ways are generally, it's interesting because I like reading descriptions of the desert, or it's interesting because something absolutely horrific is happening, and he's describing it in maybe a little bit unnecessary detail. Yeah. It's not a very fun book. Although there are some parts that made me laugh out loud. Namely, there's this bit where he shoots his camel accidentally. So, like, the parts that I found funny mostly have to do with camels, and they're also awful, but, like, in a humorous way, kind of. It's not schadenfreude. It's not like I enjoy seeing T.E. here suffer. It's more just, like, something about the way he writes some of those bits just is funny, and it's just like, God, fucking camels. Am I right? I don't know. Okay, so this book, I realize that I, like, almost never say what the books I read are about. Maybe I should tell you. It's the story of T.E. Lawrence's personal involvement in the Arab Revolt during World War I. Because the Ottoman Turks had taken over Arabia, I think some centuries before, I'm not really sure. But the British were like, you know, we are fighting the Ottomans in this World War I, that we don't call it, because it's the Great War, and, yeah, so maybe we could help these Arabs, like, band together and fight the Turks, and so that's generally what happens, and it's the tale, really, of 2 years of T.E. Lawrence, who was a British intelligence officer at the time, going around Arabia and just largely talking to people and getting them to, like, work together, because that was one of the issues, was just, like, all these different Bedouin tribes, especially, you know, like, were enemies of each other for various reasons, because they, you know, spent a lot of time just, like, stealing from each other and whatever, and so they needed to get them all to work together towards this common goal, and so it's a lot of, like, him helping Faisal to do that, and also blowing up railways, and kind of inventing guerrilla warfare. I mean, not really, but there's a lot of, like, war philosophy in this, and I know that people read it when they want to study guerrilla warfare and how, like, it can be implemented, I guess. Not that the book calls it guerrilla warfare, but it's what it is. And, also it's just a really interesting picture of, like, how these Bedouin people lived their lives, and especially the men with the camels and, like, going around the desert, and, like, generally what they do is they raid, and then during some seasons they come and they live in these little villages that are, like, temporary, and yeah, I don't know, it was just a really good book. Like, it's funny because there are parts of it that I felt like I just had to just drag myself through reading to get to the other parts that I found much easier to read or much easier to understand. And yet at the same time, like, a lot of the book was very, like, parts of the book were extremely disturbing. And I think at least part of that, it's not that I don't read disturbing things, but it's just like, because it happened, you know, because it was all real. Like, there's like, so if you've ever actually seen the movie Lawrence of Arabia, almost everything that happens in that movie happens in this book in real life. It's just that it's often different people or a different order or a different context or different reasons, and the ending is different. Like, the movie ends with them taking Damascus, but then, like, their government almost immediately falling apart, whereas in reality the Syrian kind of government in Damascus held together for something like 2 years at least, and then stuff changed. But I understand why the movie is like that, because it's like a fitting end to just like how depressing the movie gets by that point. But that's not the case in the book. It ends on a positive note for like the larger scale of what is happening, and but also it ends on a note where you're like, Lawrence has spent these 2 years with the Arabs and several years previously to that in Arabia doing other things, and at this point, but largely because of this war, and at this point is just kind of like so tired and doesn't want to be there anymore and doesn't want to do this anymore, and like is sick of being surrounded by Arabs and is sick of like fucking everything basically, and like he needs like some sleep. Anyway, so at the end he's just glad that he gets to leave. And it's like, yeah, I don't fucking blame him, because some of the stuff that happens to him was in this book completely awful. And then a lot of the stuff that he witnesses is just utterly horrifying. And like in the last few chapters up to the point where they get to Damascus and past that, there's this part where they've witnessed this, like, the aftermath of this massacre of this village, and so they just go and they kill all of these Turkish people, including some prisoners that they've taken, and it's just really fucking awful. And then when they get to Damascus and they're setting everything up, there's this part where he goes to the hospital, and like there's just dead bodies all over the place, and I just read that today, so I'm kind of like, oh god, it's like in my mind. Yeah, so I would want to not be there doing that anymore too. Yeah, so anyway, I really enjoyed reading this book, and I want to read the other book that he wrote, if I can find it, if I can get my hands on a copy of it. So we'll see if that happens, but I can't get it through the library as far as I can tell, which is like, what? I should be able to get everything through the library. Come on, this is a huge library system. Like, there's like 50 fucking libraries in it. But whatever. It's fine, I'll figure it out. But, okay, so. Okay. I'm like, we've reached the end. It's just such an epic journey, and now I'm like, we've reached the end of it. Okay, so the challenge. I need to pick another book. My mug. My little things are still in there. Alright. Okay, so here's hoping I pick something short. Alright, this is one, I think. Broca's Brain. Okay, this is the other Carl Sagan book. Broca's Brain, Reflections on the Romance of Science. I swear to fuck, is this another non-fiction book? It might be. It says it was written after The Dragons of Eden. Oh, I think it is. Why do I keep being like, oh, I bought these science fiction books by Carl Sagan because I'm too fucking stupid to read what they actually say. Oh, Jesus. Alright. This actually could be pretty cool. Oh my god. Okay. Alright. We're gonna conquer this one next. after I read a couple of other books that I've been looking forward to. But, yeah, so in conclusion, Seven Pillars of Wisdom is a really excellent book, and, the parts that I found difficult to understand or dull or hard to read were more than made up for by the other parts of the book, no matter how disturbing I might have found them. It was just, yeah, it was a good book, and I'm very glad that I read it. And part of the reason I read it is because I think T.E. Lawrence, like, seems like he was a really interesting person from what I know about him. And, yeah, so I'm glad I read it. And I hope to read The Mint if I can find it. And if I can't find it, I know someone who has recorded it online of them reading it aloud. So, I will listen to that if necessary, but I would prefer to just, like, read it myself, but we'll see. We'll see. And broke his brain. Yeah. Star Wars Thrawn by Timothy Zahn. Thrawn. When I saw this at the library, I knew I had to read it because Thrawn is, like, my favorite Star Wars villain. And he's canon again, which is so exciting, but that's a little bit of old news, but he was on the TV show Star Wars Rebels, and so he is once more canon. And the wonderful Timothy Zahn, who created him, who is my favorite Star Wars author, wrote a book about him, and this is kind of the Thrawn prequel, where did watching Thrawn, like, rise through the ranks of the Empire. So, as far as that goes, I liked the book. It took a little while for me to get into it, and one kind of, I guess, complaint that I have about it is it was a little harder to really be, as interested in the storyline because there wasn't an obvious, like, protagonist to follow. Because with Thrawn, most of his perspective is very, like, very secret. Like, he doesn't have a lot of thoughts about his opinions about people or about his plans. And I didn't find Eli Vanto to be super interesting. I guess the protagonist I found most interesting was Governor Pryce. Well, she's only governor by the end. At which point, it took me forever, but I finally realized that she was on Rebels, I'm pretty sure, because she's the governor of Lothal. But I was like, it took me forever, because I could never, like, remember the bad guys' names on that show, except Thrawn. But she had more of an obvious, like, she had a goal, and she had, like, she wanted to ascend in political power, and that was interesting. But the whole thing was interesting. It just took a little while for me to really warm up to following the story, especially since there are a number of time jumps. But at the end of the day, I really did like it. And I thought one scene in particular towards the end where Thrawn talks extensively to kind of the main villain, well, not villain, but antagonist character. It was also really good. Also, it's interesting to have a whole book that's just, it's about the villains, you know? And Thrawn, I have loved Thrawn for so long. Like, since I first read, Heir to the Empire, is that what it's called? And, like, that trilogy, way back in the day, so, like, at least 10 years ago. Probably a bit longer, actually. Yeah, it's probably something like 13 years ago. And, you know, really, really enjoyed him as a villain. It's interesting to have a book where all of the main characters are in the Empire, and they all have their goals and the things they're striving toward, but you're also sitting there like, I realize the antagonists of this are the rebels, the insurgents, but, like, they're the good guys, so it's kind of interesting, but... Thrawn. I don't even want to explain why he's my favorite Star Wars villain. He just is, okay? I legit, like, this is not a spoiler, but in the original Thrawn trilogy, they defeat him in the end, of course, and he dies. I literally cried the first time I read that, and probably this next few times, too. I've reread that trilogy a lot. Anyway, whatever. The point is that I love Thrawn, and I had to read this book, and I quite enjoyed it. Yeah, I quite enjoyed it. Glad I read it, and it was nice to read. It was kind of like, it was like popcorn or cotton candy, you know. It was like nice and easy, and that's a Star Wars book for you, I guess. Yeah, keep it quick and simple. I liked it. I like Star Wars. I like Thrawn. The end. I finished A Morbid Taste for Bones by Ellis Peters. This was the first of the Chronicles of Brother Cadfael. So this is the first of a series of books about a, I think, 12th century or something like that, roughly, Benedictine monk who, he's kind of like middle-aged, like he's lived a long, full, very interesting life, and decided later in life to join this Benedictine order and just tend his garden and like live simply. And then he solves some murder mysteries, I guess. Basically, like, I assume all the books are about murder mysteries. I've only read this one, but I didn't really know anything about it, just that it existed because there was an adaptation done probably by the BBC some time ago where Derek Jacobi plays Cadfael, so I was like, okay, I'd like to check that out someday, and so I decided to finally do it. This was a nice little book. It really was. It was nice. Like the monks, the basic plot is that the prior of the abbey wants to get himself some saint's bones so that people will come to their abbey and like miracles will happen or whatever, you know, and finds a Welsh saint that he thinks he can kind of convince the people of the town that she's from to give them her bones, and so Cadfael comes along with a few of the other monks to this Welsh village because Cadfael is Welsh. I should mention the monks are English, they're in England, but so he's Welsh and he knows Welsh obviously, so he can like translate. And then while the monks are in this village, a prominent citizen who was speaking out against the removal of the bones gets murdered. Wah, wah. And Cadfael starts investigating, kind of on the DL, who could have done this with the help of the daughter of the murdered man. So, yes, so that's what it's about, and it's really a nice book, and I think my favorite thing about it was the setting and the fact that the characters, none of them, even Cadfael, who is like, none of them come across as feeling like they don't belong in their setting, you know? Like, Cadfael has traveled a lot, like, he's worldly, like, he knows stuff, he doesn't have all the same superstitions as some of the other characters and whatnot, but he still feels really like he belongs in the setting. You know, it's not like he feels weirdly too modern or anything. And I also, the way that he solves the mystery also, like, really relies on some of the other characters' superstitions and beliefs in an interesting way, like, so it's not like he's CSIing the problem necessarily. Like, sure, he picks up a few clues, but it's mostly about, like, not about that. Like, it's more about, like, character, I guess. And don't get me wrong, I love clue-based mystery. I will be the absolute, like, last person to insult that kind of thing because I love it. But it might not be something that would fit into this setting as well. And I think that just, I don't know, just the whole thing worked together really well. And it was cozy, you know what I mean? I mean, it's about murder, but like an Agatha Christie book, it's got a comfortableness to it, and I think it's just because, like, the characters all feel very real, and yeah, there's murder, and yeah, there are people being, like, motivated by their basest instincts and just, like, doing bad things, but for some reason, it's nice. I don't know, whatever. And another main way in which it really made me think of Agatha Christie, though, because, like, I don't have a huge wealth of knowledge about different mystery writers. I've read, like, 3. But, was that there's, like, a little, like, romances happening in this, too, that Cadfael's kind of supporting, and that happens a lot in Agatha Christie books. There's always, like, a couple who are being cute and they get together in the end, you know, so. For a book that's about a monk, there's 2 romances in here. They don't have anything to do with Cadfael, but that's fine. Anywho, I thought it was a nice book, and I liked it, and I would like to read more of the series at some point in the future. Doesn't have to be anytime soon, though. Yeah, it just kind of makes you wonder, like, well, what can he possibly get up to next? Like, just, it does feel like, how many books can there be where Brother Cadfael investigates a murder? Because, like, how often do people in probably sparsely populated, like, medieval England get murdered near this abbey? So, who knows? I don't know. Like, I feel like he can't possibly go traveling somewhere else in every single book, right? Because that would be kind of silly. But, yeah, also I had a prediction as to who the murderer would be, of course, and I was not right, but I was, like, close. I had suspected the guy who ended up being the murderer. I just kind of decided, no, it's not him, it's this other, and it's like, no, I was wrong. But, whatever. But that's fun to do anyway, even if you're not right, so. Yeah, so, whatever. It was good.